Hi writing class, welcome back to another lesson. Amazing job yesterday working on lesson 42 parts A through D, adding in your missing commas, making sure to fix up your unclear words, and making sure that the word and only appears one time in your sentence. So keep up the awesome work. For today's class, we're going to be looking at lesson 42 part E. So we're going to be using this to help us write our story. So I'll read what it says in our book. Let's look at part E. The pictures in part E shows how the story begins and how it ends. But the pictures don't show what happened between the beginning and the ending. You have to make up the middle part. So let's read the sentence for the beginning of your story. Remember, in the very first box, this will be the beginning sentence of your story. It says, Lisa, Gwen, and Nicole were walking home after work. There are two people talking in the first picture, so that means that your first half of your story will need to have two paragraphs. Remember, each time a new person speaks, we have to start a new paragraph. Right, so if you look in this first box, we can see that Lisa has some exact words. I see smoke coming from that house. And then we can see that Mrs. Adams also has some exact words. Help us, please. So make sure to include that in the first half of your story. The second part of your story will tell how the women helped pull out the fire and get Miss Adams and her son out of the house. So look at the picture that shows what happened at the end of the story. Right? If we look at the picture at the end of the story, we can see that they got a ladder and that they helped get the Mrs. Adams and her son Billy down. Right? We can also see that there's a hose or a garden hose, that's one of your words, and they helped put out the fire as well. So that's how the story ends. The middle part of your story should answer the questions that are in the box. I'll read the questions. How did the women help Mrs. Adams and her son get out of the house? Did the women put out the fire? Why were Gwen and Nicole wet and dirty? What did Mrs. Adams say to the women? And what did Billy say to Lisa? Right? So you can make up what the people said or what they did in the middle half of your story. But remember, the ending of your story has to report on what's happening in this picture. To help us write our story, we have some vocabulary words underneath, so I'll read those for you. We have the word garden hose, yelled, screamed, frightened, flames, smoke, against, climbed, hugged, and sprayed. We also have 4 checks that we need to make sure to include in our story. Check 1 asks, is each sentence punctuated correctly? Remember, people's names have to start with a capital letter. The beginning of each sentence needs to start with a capital letter, and then we need to put exact words in quotation marks. Check 2 asks us, are there any unclear words in your paragraphs? Remember, before we can use the words he, she, they, or it, you first have to introduce the person or the people or the object in the previous sentence. Check 3 asks us, did you tell all the important things that must have happened? Remember, we need to look at the pictures and report on all the important things that happened. And then check 4 asks us, did you write at least 4 paragraphs? That means your story will have to have at least 4 paragraphs. So let's write the beginning of your story together. Right, so what we're going to do is write about the very first picture. So like I mentioned before, in the first box, Lisa, Gwen, and Nicole were walking home after work will be the beginning of your story. So I've written it down right here. So now what we have to do is report on what we see in the picture. Right, we can see that the girls were walking, and then we see Mrs. Adams and her son Billy are in the house. Right, we can see that there is smoke coming out of the house. So maybe we can include that in our next sentence. Perhaps we can say, suddenly they saw smoke and flames. It doesn't ask us in our check to include a part that tells one, but we've been practicing writing sentences with a part that tells one, so I thought we would include it in today's sentence as well. So suddenly, they saw smoke and flames. I can use the word they Because in the previous sentence, I've just introduced Lisa, Gwen, and Nicole. So the word they is referring to these women. Right. So suddenly, they saw smoke and flames. Now we can see that someone is saying some exact words. Right? We can see that Lisa says, I see smoke coming from that house. So I thought that could be our next sentence. So Lisa said, after the word said, I need to include my comma. And then I'm going to put quotation marks around the exact words she said. So I'm going to put my quotation marks around the words, I see smoke coming from that house. Right? We can also see that we have Mrs. Adams and her son Billy who are inside of the house. So perhaps that could be our next sentence. Notice I don't have to indent and start a new paragraph because they haven't said anything yet in this sentence that I'm going to write. Right, so my next sentence will be only introducing that Mrs. Adams and her son Billy were in the house. So my next sentence will be Mrs. Adams and her son Billy were stuck inside the house. Right. So far we've written 3 beautiful sentences, right? We wrote the first sentence that was given to us, right? We used the word they because the Lisa, Gwen, and Nicole were introduced in the previous sentence, so that word is clear, right? We wrote what Lisa said. We made sure to put our quotation marks around those words. And then we introduced that Mrs. Adams and her son Billy were stuck inside of the house. Now we want to write the exact words that Mrs. Adams said. However, since now we have a new person speaking, I'm going to start a new paragraph. So my next sentence is going to say, Mrs. Adams, and perhaps we can use one of our key words, which is yelled. So we can write Mrs. Adams yelled, comma, and then quotation marks around the exact words she said, which is help us, please. And then make sure to put in our closing quotation marks, just like that. Right, so this is the story that we have so far. Lisa, Gwen, and Nicole were walking home after work. Suddenly, they saw smoke and flames. Lisa said, and then I have my comma quotation marks, I see smoke coming from that house, period, closing quotation marks. And then we introduced Mrs. Adams and her son Billy. So Mrs. Adams and her son Billy were stuck inside the house. Now that we have a new person speaking, it's not Lisa anymore, we had to start a new paragraph, right? Mrs. Adams yelled, I put in my comma, my quotation marks, help us, please, period, and then my closing quotation marks. So now what you guys have to do is use these questions and then use this picture to write the second half of your story. Please use as many of the words from the vocabulary box as you can, and then use your 4 checks to make sure you've included all the important things. If you have any questions, let me know and keep up the awesome work. Bye!